Today I will be going over lesson 7, data structures, arrays, and array lists. So data structures are a way to organize data. You should choose a data structure that will make your data be most efficiently used. And there are many different types of data structures, some of which we'll be learning are arrays and array lists, but there's also binary trees, hash maps, and many more. And these data structures are just a way to make your data easy to organize and easy to access. So arrays is a data structure that organizes the data into a list of elements. And an element is a single data value. And this basically allows a variable to have multiple values since it's having multiple elements. So the syntax for this is you have to import a library called java.util.arrays. And then you have to put your data type and then 2 square brackets and then the name of your variable or the name of your array. And then you have to set it equal to an array of values. So to do that, you have to have 2 curly brackets and then the first value, the second value, and then as many values as you want. So why don't we try that out? So here I have imported this library. And then here I have defined this array called school supplies. And here I've got notebook, eraser, and pen. This. So now we have created this array called school supplies, right? And so this is basically how you create an example of how you create an array. So you also have to make sure that each element in the list or array must be of the data type that is specified at the beginning. So for example, here, since we specified it to be int, all of these values must be an integer. And also arrays have a fixed length, which means you cannot delete or add elements to an array after it is defined. So right now it's got 5 elements and it's always going to stay as 5 elements. You can never add more or subtract any. So let's move on to why should we use an array, right? Let's say we want to print out a list of school supply items. So the first method would be to make a variable for each school supply item and then print them all out, which, as you can see, will take a lot of effort, right? You have to do all of this code. But the second method, which is much simpler, is to make an array that has a list of school supply items. And this you can do in 2 lines. First line, you define this array, you set a bunch of values like we just did, and the second one, you print it out. And an array makes it much easier to handle data that has more than one value, but you want to access them all at the same time. Array elements are stored in an array by their index. And so the index indicates the number, order, or place in that list. So it's important to note that indexes for arrays always start at 0. They don't start at 1. So for example, in the array that we have notebook, eraser, pen, notebook is at the index 0, and eraser is at the index 1, and pen is at the index 2. So we use these indexes to access an element of an array. The syntax for that is you put your array name, you put square brackets, and inside the square brackets, you put your index. So this gives you the value of that element. So for example, here, if you print out the third element in the array school supplies, it will print out pens. Why don't we try that here? So here I've got this statement, we've got the array name. Let's change this to 2 and let's run it. Yeah, it prints out pen. Let's say we want to change these array elements. So the syntax for that is you put your array name, you put the index of the element you want to change, and then you, just like updating a variable, you set it to a new value. And so you can also do the same thing. You can just treat this like another variable and setting a new value to this variable. So when we try that out, so here, let's say we want the first element in school supplies to equal binder. So we put the name of our array, we put the index, which is 0 because it's the first element, and then I'm going to set it to the new value of binder. And just to make sure this works, why don't we print out the first element in our array now? Yes. So pen is from this earlier print statement, but we changed the first element to 0, so now it prints out binder as the first element instead of notebook. So let's say we want to get the number of elements inside the array. We want to know how many there are. The way to do that is just to put your array name dot length. And so as you can see here, length is an attribute of this array. So this gives you the number of elements. So let me try that out. So here, I want to print out the length of this array. So I'm going to say school supplies. Yeah. It gives us 3 because there are 3 items in this array. So let's say we want to loop through these arrays and we want to get the element. We want to access each element, and let's say we want to print it out. So the syntax for that is we have a for loop. And the for loop, as always, we will define the index at 0, because 0 is the start, is how you get your first element. And then in this one, this is our condition, right? This is how long we want the loop to keep running. Well, we want it to keep running until it reaches the end of the array, right? So that's what our second condition does. We want the index to keep going up until it reaches the end, which is, of course, the last element. And the way we find out where our last element is array name dot length. And then here is our iterator. We want the index to keep adding by 1. And of course, inside this for loop, we can do whatever we want. And so let's say we want to change the value of our array. Well, the way we do that is array name, brackets, and then we use the same variable, this index variable here, because it keeps changing, right, as this loop keeps iterating, and then we set it to a new value. So why don't we try this out? So here is our for loop, right? We got this index. So we want this to keep running until it reaches the end of our array school supplies, and we want it to keep adding by 1. So let's say here, I want to get the element of this. We want to get all the elements, and then I don't want to completely change it, but I just want to add an exclamation at the end of it. So to do that, we're going to say it equals supplies index plus the string exclamation mark. So school supplies index, right? Let's say it's notebook. So this is basically saying it's notebook plus an exclamation mark. So since these are all strings, it's going to be very easy to concatenate. So why don't we see what this prints out? So After that, I want, and let's just to make sure it prints out the correct thing, I'm going to say, I'm going to have this print out. Yeah, see, so it prints out notebook, exclamation mark, eraser, exclamation mark, and pen. So as you can see here, these arrays can be really useful and it can be used for a lot of different things. And now let's move on to array lists. So array lists are basically just like arrays, but you can add and delete elements inside an array. So it's a bit more useful. And so I strongly encourage you to check out this link, Java ArrayList, to learn more about array lists and how to use them. So let's move on to the hackathon that's gonna be starting next week. So next week you will be making a hackathon project in Java. You can make it on anything you want, and you should come up with your idea for this hackathon project next week. And sorry, this week. And so some examples are you can make a Fibonacci sequence generator. You can make a Pythagorean theorem calculator where when you enter in A and B, it'll give you what C is. And you can also make a coin flip simulator, right? So it'll simulate a coin flip and tells you whether it's heads or tails. And maybe it can tell you how many times there were heads and how many times there were tails. So these are some really good ideas that you can do it on. And also in your hackathon project, once you're done, you will also be submitting a very short video that showcases your project and, shows what it does. So let's move on to assignment. The link is this link right here. And in this assignment, you'll be creating a program that takes in a month number that the user inputs into the console. So the console's right here. It'll take whatever the user types in here, and it'll print out the month that it is. An example is if the user inputs the number 2, then the computer will print out February, because February is the second month of the year. And so you'll have to create an array. You have to create several methods, and then of course you will be testing out your program here by creating an object and calling methods on that object. And also some other things that you might want to do this week is think of some ideas for your hackathon project and then learn more about array lists. So that's all for today, and I'll see you next week.